Hi everybody, and welcome back to my third and final lecture for the Summer School Serious Game Design program for Tallinn University. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at narrative design for game development. So, we have to start off with a very deceptively easy question. What is a story and what is not a story? Well, again, as I mentioned in my last lecture, I am a structuralist at heart, and I like to break things down based on what elements they have, and we can do that with a story. And a story has three primary elements. The first being a character. If you don't have a character, it is very, 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 very hard to have a story. Who is this story about? The second element is a setting. If you don't have a place where this happens, the story doesn't seem to flow. And the setting also encompasses the timeline of the actions that happen. So where does the story take place? And the final one is our plot. And our plot can best be summarized as what happens and why it happens. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at all three of these, and we're going to look at them not in the order that I've presented here. So we're going to start off with the plot. What we're going to look at first is the simple plot, the absolutely simplest plot that you can conceive. And the simplest plot that we can conceive is simply this. Someone wants something badly and has difficulty getting it. The someone is our character, the want is their goal, and the difficulty getting it. Well, if we don't have difficulty getting it, it's just the rendition of what happened in a day. So, someone, I, want a glass of water, so I walked over to the sink and I poured myself a glass of water. This is not a story. There is no challenge. It's a recitation of facts. Now, what's interesting is that we can take this very simple conception of a plot and change it and add the add the elements that we know already about our game into it to explain our game's plot. Someone, the player or player character, wants, what do they want? Well, they want to come first in the race. They want to rescue the princess and has difficulty in reaching this goal. The difficulty comes from the challenges or the rules that are associated with it. So if we already know who our someone is, we already know what the ludic goal of the game is, and we know what our challenges or what our rules are going to make it, how our rules are going to make it difficult, then we can write out a one-sentence simple plot for our game very, very quickly and very easily. From that simple plot, we can then expand, and there are several ways that we can do this. The first is what's known as the hero's journey, from The Hero of a Thousand Faces, with a Thousand Faces, by Joseph Campbell. And this is the most widely used narrative tool in game design. Campbell theorized that really there was only fundamentally one story out there, and that it created this grand monomyth, this core identity which all other stories were based off of. And he labeled it into the beautiful diagram that you see in front of you here today, where the hero starts out, there's a call to action, there's the supernatural aid, and then the threshold guidance, and then through to the abyss and the challenges, atonement and return to the life before. This is the model that tends to be used in almost all of the video game narratives out there. The hero receives the call to action, the challenges are presented above him, it rises to a crescendo, and then the hero returns after having completed their quest. However, it is by far not the only method out there to look at plot in narrative design. Another method of looking at plot is the 7 basic plots from Christopher Booker. And Christopher Booker disagreed with Campbell. His view was that there is not just one story out there, but in fact he could identify 7 different stories with little bits and pieces that could be added and dropped out of each of them. The 7 that he identified were the rags to riches story, where a person starts with nothing and manages to build themselves up. Another story he identified was the overcoming the monster, where a monster is confronted and and the valiant player or the valiant hero attempts to defeat the monster. The quest. An evil threatens the land and you must go forth and recover the artifacts to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm us. The voyage and return, where a character is dropped into a strange world. And just as he starts to understand the world, he manages to get his way home. The comedy, not ha-ha comedy, but the traditional form of comedy, where you have things like mistaken identity and errors that cause the plot to move forward. The tragedy, where someone is destroyed by getting everything that they want. So they get what they think they want and it takes them apart. And finally, the rebirth, where the character is completely destroyed, but through this process goes through a change and is reborn stronger and better. Now, what is useful about Christopher Booker's book is that he gives a summary of each step in each of the 7 types of plot. And you can actually look at it and you can take those and apply them to your game design idea. So, is your game design idea going to be a story of someone starting from nothing and moving to greatness, like an RPG? Or is it going to be more like Alice in Wonderland and a voyage and return effect? So, having finished talking about plot for the time being, we're going to move on to character. And the first thing that we have to think about when we think about a character is, how do we describe the character? We need their physical description. What age are they? What sex are they? Are they male? Are they female? Are they other? What race are they? What body type? Etc., 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 etc. The amount of detail that you can pull out of the physical description. Do they wear glasses? Do they have a tattoo? What does this say about them? What type of tattoo is it? Where did they get it? All of this fits into the physical descriptions. Even when we are designing a game with an invisible protagonist, an invisible hero, we still have to think about their physical descriptions, because those are the physical descriptions of the player, the persona, which David has talked a little bit about. We also can think about the character description in terms of their psychological description. The big 5 personality traits: ocean, openness, forgive me, I can't remember the acronym, but the psychological description, the personality traits, how they respond to certain stimuli. What is their history? What are their jobs that they've had? What are the education that they had? How does this affect how they think and how they behave? And we also have to think about the character's goals and dreams. What is the character reaching for? How is this different from character A to character B? Now we have what we call the unity of opposites. There are two extremes on a continuum of character. The first one, at the far side of the continuum, is the protagonist, the hero, the player character. Well, normally the player character. And their goal tends to match the ludic goal. They are striving to move the game forward and to complete the game and get their reward. At the other end of the extreme is the antagonist, the bad guy. Now, it's important to remember that not all plots require a bad guy. Sometimes the bad guy can purely be a survival instinct, or it can be man versus nature, or a disembodied bad guy. But when we do have a bad guy, their goal is in direct opposition to the player's goal. That's why they're at the extreme ends of the continuum. All the other characters that are in your game should fit somewhere along the continuum. The closer they are to the player, the more likely they are to be allies. The closer towards the antagonist, the more likely they are going to be enemies. Now, the unity of opposites is basically that in many cases, the antagonist is the direct opposite of the protagonist. If we think of the movie Unbreakable, we have the main character who is unbreakable, and the villain, who I'm afraid to give spoilers even for a film that's that old, is Mr. Glass, and very breakable. Now, if the player and the antagonist can compromise at any point, this relationship falls apart. If they can just sort of sit down and go, hey, you know what, you've got some fine points there, I think I'll change my behavior, thanks, goodbye, suddenly we no longer have the conflict that is moving the narrative forward. So we have removed the difficulty in getting to the goal. So now let's talk a little bit about setting. There are sort of three things that we can talk about in setting. First of all, we have an environment. We have to think about the technology that is available. And we also have to think about the culture of the setting. We're going to focus mostly on just describing and talking about environment and environmental storytelling. But be aware that technology and culture shapes the environment that the player will be going through. So let's take a look at two games to start with. First of all, we'll take a look at Animal Crossing, and the second one that we'll look at is Limbo. So if we look over at the picture of Animal Crossing over there, we can see a couple of things about it. One, it's very bright, it's very open, it's kind of welcoming. The characters are smiling, everybody seems happy, it's a beautiful sunny day. And this gives the impression that there isn't much threat here. There isn't much that can cause you harm or damage. In contrast, if we take a look at the image for Limbo, we have a dark, scary, threatening environment where the character is enclosed and seems to be almost a little claustrophobic. By deciding on these artistic styles, you help to evoke a mood in the player. You help to give them signposts to say, hey, you should be feeling this, or you should be feeling this. And the environment tells a story. So you should stop and think, what type of story am I attempting to tell with this environment? There are, of course, other areas in narrative design that we don't really have enough time to talk about in this short course. But let's just briefly touch on them. We have things like the linear versus non-linear storytelling. Does your story follow a simple path from A to B to C to D, or does it split into many different options and optionalities? How do you work with those? And again, unfortunately, that is a 2-hour lecture in of itself. There's the story arc structure. We have Frank Daniel's 3-act model that is borrowed from movies to help us to conceptualize what happens first and how does the plot and structure move forward. We can delve deeper into world building and the environment and start talking about economics. We can start talking about the fact that you can end up with hyperinflation in World of Warcraft. We can take a look at the society. What would society look like if it was steampunk-based technology versus the technology that we have today? We can look at the history of the world and how that affects all of the environmental and character design. We should also remember that there's a whole discussion to be had on how to document the design. And, of course, we can go much deeper into character design, specifically about the artistic representation of these characters and how do you represent in a physical way the psychological elements. The final thing that we need to think about in narrative design is how to avoid or subvert tropes, how to not fall into the common everyday expectations of a player. There are some pitfalls with narrative design that new designers have a tendency to get themselves stuck with. The first one is that they don't keep it simple. They get swept up in the process of the design, and it becomes a sweeping epic a la George Martin or Lord of the Rings, and suddenly it becomes incredibly confusing to explain to the other people in your team what it is that you want, where you want it, why you want it. So please remember that a simple story that's well executed is so much stronger than one that confuses your player or confuses you. This also has the added advantage that it prevents features from being added into the game again and again and again, and it's spreading out and feature creep ending up. The other side is the railroading. This is where the designer has one specific idea of this is how the story is going to go, and that is it. Then the player is only along for the ride. Please, 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 player choices need to matter. The player, at the very least, needs to think that their choices matter, and really they should. You are designing a game, not a movie. The player is not a passenger who is just simply clicking on a couple of buttons. They should be shown what is going on, not told what is going on, and their actions should matter. Finally, beware of tropes. Don't just repeat what has gone before. Don't just borrow wholesale. This causes all manner of problems, and it makes your work derivative. So those are the 3 big pitfalls for beginner narrative designers. So at this stage, we should have a couple of products made up. You should have a one-sentence, simple plot of your game. You should have a description of your player character and or any villains that you are going to be using. A description of your setting and notes on your art style. And you might also have selected either the hero's journey or one of the 7 basic plots as a basis for your discussion and for you moving forward. As always, thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any, thank you again to Rundown Universe for helping out with this, and to my artist Irina. If you have any questions, hit me up on my email or check out the forums and leave me a link. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.